Welcome to the Wineskins Podcast. Your hosts are Reverend Dr. Todd Seelau and Reverend Jerry Herships. Welcome to this conversation about Christianity and fresh church expressions.
Well, thank you for joining us, everyone. This is the Wineskins Podcast video, and this is Reverend Jerry Herships, and I'm Dr. Todd Seelau, and we're happy to be here with you. We're talking about starting new things inside the church, but also outside of the church, and kind of like what motivates us in our stories and ways to help other people start new things, and maybe connect with other people that are starting new things. Because it's important to be innovative in our world, especially the post-COVID world. And so it's going to be a good time. How you been doing, Jerry?
I'm good, man. As good as you can be. We all went through, I think, that phase of, even if you had a good day, you didn't want to say you had a good day because the whole world was falling apart. When the whole world was crashing down. But now there is, and I don't even like this term. I just got to figure out a better term than the new normal. But there is sort of a thing. It's 6 months is a long time to be, constantly bummed about that. You got to go, okay, well, you know what? I still got to get groceries. I just got to do it with a mask and hand sanitize going in and sanitize going out and really just figure out a new way to live through it. And I think it, this too shall pass. But, now there's moments of joy creeps in, no matter how hard I try not to. I'm like, damn it, look at that. That might be a smile breaking across my face. So yeah, all things said and done, things are okay. Things are doing
That's
okay.
Great, man.
Yeah.
That's good. It's hard to always be down, and we have to find ways to be happy and find ways to find joy. And because who knows how long, everything's unknown now. So it's a different world regardless, because
I think
things that we thought we knew, we didn't know.
Totally. I think for like the first, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, I'm like, all right, you know what, you got to preach on hope. People need hope right now. Well, 6 months in, you're like, all right, you know what, I gotta work in a sermon on forgiveness or something, maybe grace. I'll throw it in. Like, you can't do hope like every Sunday. And you realize, I think everybody is in a different place with this thing. There's people still out of work that, I know so many people in F&B, food and beverage, and they're scrambling, man. And even if it's open. I read a thing that said 87, I think it was 87%, the New York Times said 87% of restaurants and bars in New York could not pay their full rent. 87%, man. That's insane. And so I don't think we're out of the woods yet for both stuff like that, and definitely not for church. I think there's churches that are still going, all right, man, I don't know how many more weeks we got, and so in some ways that leads us to go, look, we have to live in this moment right here. I think the idea of a 5-year plan has sort of shit the bed. It's out the window, because who knows? The Methodist, we don't even know if the Methodist Church will be here in 2 years. So it's just a different day.
And there's something about living in the present, and there's something about that spiritual, right? The spiritual discipline of being present and being centered in those things. And I've been trying to practice those things and reading about spirituality more and the mystics and some of that to try to get more. If you're gonna be alone anyway more often, like, you might as well get meditate and be spiritual, right? And do some of that stuff.
You can only, I can only watch so many episodes of Justified. I love that show, but man, at some point you're like, Raylan and Boyd, okay, kill each other, all right? You gotta find better ways to spend your time, and I've been reading more than I ever have. I've been listening to books on tape more than ever. I'm an auditory when it comes to learning, and that has been super helpful because I'm fun. Do you know Greg Boyle from Homeboy Industries in LA?
Oh yeah, I've heard of him. I don't know him personally, but I know of him.
Have you read any of his shit? Any of his books?
No.
Okay, here's the thing. I was telling you earlier before we started recording, I was driving up from Denver up here to Aspen, and I put in He's got his second book is called Barking at the Choir. And if you download it onto Audible, and I just started listening to it when I just left the driveway down there and came up here, no less than 5 times it had me in tears. I mean,
wow.
And he reads it. He narrates the book. So, I mean, these are his stories. Like,
That's awesome.
knows these guys that he's talking about. And it is the most amazing book on grace and love and compassion and being in the moment. And, I mean, you hear the stories of these cats, and they are beyond horrific. Like my mom dropped me off in an orphanage, and I was down there for a month before my grandma was able to get out of her where she dropped me off and came down and picked me up. I mean, there's like, how do you process? And then these guys who have found God, mostly through Father Greg Boyle. He's a Jesuit, and I'll tell you what, man, he restored my faith in God and the church and the work that we do, because he's living it. That
That's
dude
awesome.
is living it. And talking about being in the moment, he said, since I've been here, I've done 220 gang-related funerals.
Oh, shit.
220. And he still speaks with joy and still talks with these guys and finds the small victories. And, man, if there's ever been a time we need to live into finding small victories, it's now. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
How do we find those? Because you can go down that rabbit hole of, pandemics and unemployment and the economy and the election, and it can be easy to spin out. So I'm like going, that was a great bowl of pasta I just had, and hey, I'm down 2 pounds, and oh, shit, how come I've never tried this wine before? It was $12. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm really trying to find those moments. Those are the things that are sort of motivating me now. So
that's awesome. I think that's an important thing. And speaking of stories, I'll share a story about kind of what motivated me, and then maybe you share a story about what kind of motivated you to start to think outside the box of, we both were in the church, and then we both started things outside. We started church in bars, both of us did. And so there's a reason, there's probably a lot of reasons that we did it, but there's always some stories there. And I'm glad you brought that up, because, his stories and Homeboy Industries, I know, have done a lot of great things. I know a lot of people that have been there, and everyone tells me I need to go check it out. And
you do.
Those stories is what keeps you coming back, because starting new things is difficult. And now we're seeing it's necessary as things are changing. But we were doing this before it was necessary. Right. when we were just gluttons for punishment. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But it's so important to innovate, and it's so important to find new ways to do things, and church has changed throughout the history of time. The history of the church, we see it change. We see all these, especially every 500 years, there's major shifts, and we're kind of in the middle of something like that now. And so we have to be thinking about that and thinking in that way. But I think, to me, I come back to the stories. And so one of the stories that my favorite stories I like to tell about, what got me thinking about wanting or inspiring me to want to start church in a different way is, and I'm not, man, I hope I didn't tell this last week, or last month, but I don't think I did. So I was driving from Albuquerque, New Mexico, to visit my buddy, and I ran out of gas, because I don't always like to get gas. Like, I like to let it run as long as I can. And so I ran out just as I got to his house. And so I was like, okay, I'll have to figure that out in the morning. And this was before Uber or anything like that. So I walked down, and it was a couple miles, and it was downhill, and I walked to the gas station. I got a gas can, and then I look up the hill, and I'm like, oh man, that's far, and it was then it was about noon, it was getting hot. Yeah. And I was like, well, I'll ask somebody for a ride. And so I asked some people, and they were like, oh no, we're doing something. And then inside the gas station, I literally heard these people talking about their Bible study, that they had just come from. And I was like, oh man, they'll give me a ride. And they were like, no, we can't, And I'm like, man, this is a Good Samaritan situation, right? Like,
just kind like that, yeah.
And so then, like, I go outside, I'm kind of about to give up, and somebody with a fish on the back of their car, like, pulls up to get fuel, and I'm like, oh, man, like, they gotta give me a ride, right? It's just like a couple miles, not even far. And I was like, hey, could you give me a ride? They're like, no. And so I was just like, okay, I'm just going to walk. And there was this guy in this old beat up, like, white, like, truck. And I was like, well, I'll just ask this dude, like, one last ditch effort as I'm going to walk anyway. And I was like, hey, man, do you mind giving me a ride up the hill? And he's like, oh, no, I don't mind at all. And he looked kind of really kind of scruffy, kind of smelled bad, kind of like,
right.
You know.
No fish on his bumper.
Yeah, no fish at all. And then even to take that up a notch, like so I put the gas can in the back of his truck and he starts driving me and he just starts using like really filthy language and like telling me, because I lived in El Paso or near El Paso, and he's like, oh, you know, me and my buddy used to go to Juarez and get prostitutes and like all this stuff, but like he was like telling these very graphic stories and like and all this stuff. And I was like, man, you know, like I was just like listening, you know, and laughing or whatever, talking to him. Right. And then we get to my car, and I had a clergy sticker on the back of the car because I could park in the good parking spots at the hospital. Right. And so I had this clergy sticker on the back of my car, and he looks at it and he's like, oh shit, like I didn't know you were a pastor. Like, I'm so sorry, like, that I said all that stuff. I was like, no, man, no. Like, I'm glad you could talk about it. I'm glad you could tell me. Like, me being a pastor shouldn't prevent you from that, you know? Like, you should be more careful when you go to Mexico, you know, just some health advice. But
here's my only advice for you.
Free advice, but yeah. I don't like, it does not offend me that you're telling me these stories, and it does not, like, these are your stories, and you should be able to tell these stories. Yeah. And so, you know, I never saw him again. But then I started thinking, and it really affected me, because I got very convicted about, could I take this guy, could I bring him to our, like, church Bible study, like, on Wednesday nights with, you know, some of the nice ladies that are there and, like, all of the things. And if I did bring him, like, people wouldn't like how he was dressed. People wouldn't like how he smelled. You know, but if he talked and he used that language that he was using, or if he, you know, told those stories he was telling, and so, like, he would have to go and be on his best behavior and kind of act like somebody else. I'm like, man, like, why would I do that to him? Why would I do that to these nice ladies at the church, right, that come to Bible study? Like, it would just make it awkward for everybody. But I was like, so this guy just he just has to be somebody else, or he can't go to church. You know, like, that didn't sit right with me, and I was like, there needs to be a church for people like this, where people can just tell their stories, and people can use whatever language they want, and people can express themselves and see where God is working in their lives, without having to pretend to be something else, and or to feel the pressure of behaving themselves, or to, you know, make sure that they bathe before they come, whatever it is, you know, and I was like, there's no place, like, where could I tell this guy to go? Because I knew all the churches that are local. I wanted to tell him, hey, go to this church. But I had nothing. Like, I couldn't even tell this guy where to go to church. And that really bothered me. Like, it really bothered me. And so I kind of thought, well, you know, I need to create communities for people like this. Yes. You know, and people that don't fit in. And so many people that I've invited to church, they stop coming, they never come back, you know, especially if I get them on a committee, which there's a lot of pressure to get new people on committees in churches, and every one of them, man, they're gone within a few months of being on a committee, because they see how the sausage is made, you know, so to speak. And when you're new, that's not like, but that's a problem. And so that was one of my big, like, inspirations and, like, pivotal moments where I was like, okay, I need to find a way to include people like this without making them change first. Right. Like, because when Jesus went to the disciples, he wasn't like, hey, clean up, and then, you know, then I'll help you, you know, like then come follow me, or change yourself, or be, you know, he's like, hey, like, I'll help you fish for people. Right? Like, I'll take you just as you are, and I'll help you do what you do, but I'll help you do it in a different way. and they were all in, and it worked.
You look at those disciples, you're like, these guys were not the cream of the crop, man. I mean, they're like zealots and tax collectors and fishermen. I mean, they were the bikers and the welders and the truck drivers of today. You know, I mean, they were folks that maybe didn't have the perfect pair of khakis, you know, that were ironed or their cleanest polo set up. And Jesus was like, you know what? No, you need to learn right off the bat. I don't need perfect people. You know, I mean, I'll be honest, man, that's probably been the thing that saved me from quitting ministry 100 times was, you know, when I think of what a train wreck I am and think, you know what, I'm not the right fit for this. Because we look at our colleagues and some of them really, you know, have the perfect khakis, you know, and have the tie just right. And, you know, and I fucking love clothes, but I'm really cognizant that there are places that I don't fit, and a lot of them are church events. And you know, for me, that what you said when you look at who Jesus called for the disciples, it's like, for me, that's who God was calling you to bring into the fold. Who are those folks now?
Well, and it's not because we need to just get rid of what we're already doing. And it's not that what we're doing is bad, because the people that are coming to church need a place to go too. And I don't need them to come to the bar. Like, they shouldn't have to go like somewhere where they're not, you know, but there needs to be different kind of manifestations of church so that people can go where they feel comfortable and where what speaks to them.
Yeah. I used to always think when people, you know, a lot of times I always got a sort of a bad rap for thinking that I was sort of bagging on church. And it's like, no, I was bagging on shitty church. You know, I was bagging on I think God celebrates and rejoices in anything that's authentic. And it doesn't matter what community that is. You know, that can be if your jam is like singing the Gloria Patri, so be it, as long as that's really your thing and that's what moves your heart. My wife's dad, my father-in-law, was a choir director for 30 years. She hears those songs and she tears up. I hear those songs and I got nothing. I just don't have anything for it. I mean, it just doesn't ring true to me. And that doesn't mean they're not true. It just means for me, and like the guy that had the truck that gave you a ride, that just isn't a connector. You know, I mean, for him, it might be Tool, or it could be U2, or it could be, I don't know, pick your poison. I mean, it could be any of those things. You know, I often think of music and think, you know, there was a time when if you liked music, that meant you liked Bach and Beethoven, only because that was it. There was no other option. So it was either you like this, and now, you know, we go, you know, symphony music's dying, and truth be told, it is. But I sometimes I think that's too narrow. I mean, I want to go, yeah, but music is thriving because suddenly there's a genre for people doing trip hop and people doing like all kinds of crazy shit that never existed before. And so now people have thought, I don't like music. It's like, no, you just don't like Bach, but you love Coltrane, or you don't like, it's not about liking Coltrane, but you know what? You love Social Distortion. You know what I mean? Like there is a way that something speaks to you. And I think, I mean, the way I understand the kingdom of God is God's always making the circle wider, right? God is always making it bigger and saying, come on in. You know what I mean? Gregory Boyle said, he goes, God only knows 4 words. Come dance with me. And I was that's the best, man. I'm like, he's like, nah, get over here, man. Come on, get over here. And for me, there's this sense of how do we create space? And I think this was a driving motivator for both of us, where how do we create space for folks that don't look like every other church person? And for me, that was both the homeless and, you know, with After Hours, that was a huge piece. I mean, it was a huge thing to find a space where people didn't have to hide their tattoos. Like people didn't have to, I mean, we can curse, right? I mean, there's no, on this podcast, I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, I remember, you know, Heather saying, she goes, She goes, well, for good or bad, I'm probably a bad guy. She started a roller derby in Alabama. I mean, she's
– oh, that's awesome.
Like, she's the shit, right? And she's like, I don't want to go to a church where if I'm emotionally drained and having a day and I say fuck, that suddenly the whole room sucks the air out. She goes,
right.
And I never found that until after hours, where no one would not. And there's a lot of pastors that have said, and you know what, if she's telling a tragic story about something that happened to her in her lifetime, and the biggest thing you're concerned with is the F-bomb,
yeah,
man, listen, the point, man. Like, the point is, how are we compassionate for others? How do we meet them? And to me, like, that was the Jesus message, right? Was, I'm going to go to wherever they are. If they're on the road, if they're at the well, if they're at the lake, wherever it is, I'm going to go to them. It wasn't somewhere along the line. We kind of got this, put our hands behind our head and go, yeah, they know where we're at. They'll find us. It's like, when did that happen? Because that was not what Jesus taught. You know what I mean? There was nothing like that. And so, you know, for me, a huge motivator was I've done comedy for so long and bartended so long and had tons of these conversations. And everybody I had the conversations with didn't go to church. I was in Denver 24 hours ago. And there's a guy there that, in fact, you and Larry need to meet, man. I need to hook you. In fact, I was telling him about you, as a matter of fact.
Oh, that's cool.
And you should look him up. His name's Larry Nix. And he's been in the scene in Denver for a long time. And he's ridiculously talented and everything. And, you know, we walked down the street and got a beer and sat outside. And next thing you know, we're talking about God. And I said, my wife said to me the other day, she goes, here's your problem. Your problem is, she goes, you have always related more to people that don't go to church.
Yeah.
She goes, and considering a pastor's job is at church, that can be a bit of a challenge sometimes. And
absolutely.
I mean, it's really hard in that regard. And what I've tried to learn to do is to realize every interaction is holy. Every interaction is sacred. It's not just, you know, when I'm within an earshot of the organ. It's like, because both of us now are in that dynamic where we're engaging with people outside the church, and we have a traditional, you know, congregation of people that, you know, so it's not that I have any animosity towards us, because to your point, that feeds people in amazing ways. It's just, again, how do we act like Jesus, who was a badass, who was always saying, this is great, how do we make it bigger? How do we, and that was the motivator for me, was who is it that we're not reaching in the church now? And I think, you know, I mean, you and I have worked together now for a number of years, and we both know that we're unique to that dynamic, that is a very specific, even among our colleagues, it's very specific, the people we want to reach, and others may do it as a sidebar, but for us, it's like a passion. It's sort of, how do we connect with those people? And I think it really is hard when you're trying, you know, on YouTube, I've got 30 people in my church, and yet I'll get north of 100 views. The people watching don't go to church. They're not people. But it doesn't mean that they don't need a word of hope, or to be reassured that it's going to be okay, or, you know, that forgiveness is going to help you a lot more than it helps the person you forgive. I mean, like, these are universal messages that it doesn't matter what gauges you have or piercings or ink. It's like everybody needs to hear those things. And in some ways, I think the church is, you know, you're talking about every 500 years. I think that's a reference to Phyllis Tickle and I think
she's a badass. She's a total badass. I love her.
Total badass. Total badass. I think we're there. I think this pandemic has sort of catapulted us into this new reality. And I don't know if the traditional church will ever recover. And I think that might be okay. This may be the time for people to get their spirituality, you know, through a 15 or 20 minute thing that they want, through something like this, through watching a podcast of two like regular guys talking about God. And suddenly it's like, you know what? We don't have to be in vestments or in robes or wearing our collars. Like, we can just be sitting in a sports bar, and sit there and go, why have we made – I said something in one of my books, and I said, why does the sacred have to be somber? And I mean, we've completely negated the joy of God in so many places. And I think, I've been to your worship. I know, like, there's joy there in those places, and there's people that authentically engage. And I think in the end, that's all people want. I mean, they just want an authentic engagement. And, especially non-church people, man, they can sniff out fake shit in a blink. Like, so I don't think their real problem is with God, or maybe even their real problem is not with church. It's with people sort of posing and sort of kind of pretending, or you can just spot that they're not really into it, and they're like, I don't want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
And so for me, a huge motivation was, how do I do something that is authentic first? And then figure out, okay, do I need to add a song here? Or, do we need the Our Father at the end of this? I mean, right now we do that on my YouTube stuff every Sunday. I don't know if we'll always do that. I'll get feedback. Because the reality is, I don't know if you saw that survey that said like 91% of people in the country, 91% of people in the country aren't looking for a faith community. It's like, are we going to sell a product that only 9% of the country is looking for? It's like, then, man, we need to, any marketer on the planet would say, well, fuck that. Don't use the product. And I mean, that's not a brilliant marketing person. That's somebody that first year marketing 101 would know the answer to that. It's like, well, stop selling the widgets, man. You need to find something else,
Yeah, exactly. And we're all just starting more churches to try to engage that 9%. And when I started this, it was 20%, and that seemed ridiculous. Now it's 9%. And it's getting lower. It's getting smaller.
Right.
And
right.
so what you said about music, I think, is a really good example, because now you have all these the way culture works, right, is that you have all these different things. You used to have just music, and now you have all these different things, all these different kinds of music. You used to just have beer, right? Or like, you had Miller, you had Coors, and you had Bud.
And the beer, he ordered a beer. Right. That was what he ordered.
Right. And so now, there's a million different kinds of beer, and there's different brands, and there's different, there's small batch things, there's small breweries, there's microbreweries, there's a million different things, and everything is like, everything is going that direction, and the church is trying to be one size fits all, or maybe we have a contemporary service too,
right?
And then we split our resources and do two things, instead of just one thing like really well, which I definitely have opinions about that, too. That, like, just do one thing really well.
That's right.
Anyway, but like, so the church needs to, I think, understand. I think it's very important. And if people are out there listening, like, if you have an idea of a way to do church differently, now is the time. Totally. I mean, now is past the time to start trying to figure out how to do that. And we're here to help. To help with that, and reach out to us, and we can even have you on here next month and, have a conversation with you about it and find ways to help you, because, like, you have all these different kinds of music and genre of music, and people do what they like, and the church is still trying to be one size fits all, or maybe two. You have small and large, and then you have different kinds, kind of, but they're all different. Nobody really knows the difference. When people find out I'm Methodist, they don't. Unless they're Methodist, they don't know. They're like, well, are you Christian? And I'm like, well, yeah.
All the time. All the time. So we're Methodist. Oh, yeah, well, I'm Christian. It's like, wait, let me clarify. I am too. That's my vibe. They're like, oh, okay. Huh. That to me is fascinating. But, you realize that in the history of the church, in fact, there was a great article that came out the other day, and it was from Pew Research, and they said percentage-wise, more atheists and agnostics have a higher degree of knowledge about religion than people that go to church.
Right.
They said the highest level within the church was Mormons, then evangelical Christians, and then it went down through the list of all the different. They said, but really? They go, and part of that reason is because atheists and agnostics care. Like, they did the research. Like, this was something that mattered to them. And then they made a decision, and it was different than obviously the ones you and I made. But I applaud the fact that there's it bothers me. There's some relatively famous clergy and theologians that have gotten famous about bashing the spiritual but not religious. And I'm like, first off, how the hell you ever think you're going to bring them over into what you're doing if all you do is insult them, and bash them? Two, quite frankly, the vast majority of people that I know that don't go to church are asking the harder questions. I do get into the deeper conversation with people that don't have quite frankly, that don't have all the bullshit that guy had with you when he found out you were clergy. It's like, sometimes I try to put it off as long as I can, what I do, because I can feel the shift. Like it's like a thing that happens in the conversation. And so if I can go in, get to know a bartender, do a shot and a beer, hang out, talk to them, and just be me, and then later on they find out what they do, suddenly, like, that in it of itself becomes sort of like a theological entry point. Like, they'll be like, well, I don't get it. Like, what are you doing in a bar? Like, literally, that's said 1,000 times in my lifetime. I mean,
or are you allowed to drink? Like,
right.
And so for the first time, I've gone a couple of months without drinking. I'm taking a little break from drinking. And so I was watching the Laker game in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, like on Saturday. And they only have a few tables. It's 25%. They're only seating 25% of people. And so I'm just like in the bar area, but the bar's not open, only tables. So I'm sitting by myself, and this other guy came to watch the game. And they were like, oh, can he just sit with you? And I was like, oh, sure. And then somebody else knew him, and so he came and sat. So the three of us are sitting there, and this guy orders this bottle of wine. Then the guy that buys the wine comes and sits down, and we're all talking, and they're all asking what I do. But I had already turned down. The guy wanted to buy me a drink. I'm like, oh, no, no thanks. And then he's like, you want some of this wine? I'm like, oh, no thanks, and. Right. Then they're like, well, what do you do? And I'm like, man, I'm not about to tell them I'm a preacher, because they're going to be like, oh, the preacher doesn't drink. And then all of a sudden I'm like enhancing this stereotype.
Right.
That they're already going to think. And so I was like, well, I'm a musician, and, I'm helping out with the church here in town, and, just kind of glance over it, because it's a small town. Someone's going to find out. I don't want to lie to them, or them to feel like they're being lied to later, because these are people, obviously a lot of people know them in the community, so they're going to find out. I'm going to see them again.
Exactly.
So I had to throw it in, but I was like, man, I've never been in this situation before, because usually I'm very comfortable being like, oh yeah, preachers can drink, Christians can drink, know, and you have that angle, right?
The not drinking has nothing to do with your theological stance. That's nothing. You're just like, you know what, I want to be healthier right now. Take a moment.
Exactly. But that's what they assume. That's what they're going to assume.
Absolutely.
And then all of a sudden I'm a self-righteous. Then they're going to feel weird about drinking in front of me.
Right.
Right. And so I'm like, God. And then it messes up the whole conversation and the relationship. And I'm new to town. I'm trying to meet people.
Right.
And I'm like, not drinking is actually hindering my ability to do evangelism. And
to do the kind of work you want to do, it's actually, you're finding it to be a hurdle that you haven't had to deal with before. So
it was very strange for me.
What was the hardest point? Because, I think a piece of this podcast is about people that go, damn, you know what? I want to do what Todd does. I want to do what Jerry's doing. I'm like, and it's easy to, I was invited to be on a panel because they were like, okay, we're gonna talk to the grandfathers and grandmothers of church planting, meaning anybody that's had a church that's been around for more than 10 years that they planted. You know, and I'm like, I've already got age issue shit. You know, I don't need.
Yeah, I know. They don't need to be saying that to
Todd's
you.
going, holy shit, this is totally messing with his head. But I hear that, and I'm like, how do you encourage people to take the leap, to do it, and at the same time, let them know, look, if you think this is going to be hard, you're right. I mean, like, there's going to be really shitty things. What was a low point that you remember in the last few years that, I mean, since you decided to start, that you went, God, this is, and I know mine sadly had to deal with other clergy and stuff. Was almost never, I was always more accepted by the people in the bars than I was with my own colleagues. But does a thing come to mind when you think?
Well, that's one thing is that I could be a pastor of a church that's not doing well, because most churches aren't doing well, and I could be reaching no new people, like 0 new people, and I would be more accepted by my colleagues.
Totally.
Than like really putting myself all in to, you know, trying to meet new people that don't go to church, and like putting all my effort into that, and having stories. Like, I remember when I showed up at a meeting with, like, you know, I think 25 different stories of people's lives who were changed in major ways in the last quarter or the last, you know, however long. And so, like, all these things are happening, but if I was doing normal stuff, I would be more accepted. I would have more friends. I would have more of a community. I wouldn't be so lonely. I wouldn't be, like, I just had this realization that really kind of hurt me, because not only is it a lonely feeling for me, but it's really discouraging to people that, you know, that want to start something new, or are tempted to start something new, and then they see how lonely it is, or they see how, you know, rejected people are, or people just talking shit behind your back, or people questioning your call to ministry, or people, you know, and it's not, and yeah, it's other clergy or other, you know, just other people in the church that don't understand what you're doing.
Right.
And I definitely have a trigger for when people don't understand me, and I'm trying really hard to be able to communicate better in a way that people can understand. And I'm working on that. I'm trying to own my part of that.
Right.
But
sure.
I just remembered, I mean, that's part of the hard thing, is you're doing something that's not really ever been done before. It kind of has, but a long time ago.
Right.
And people don't understand it. But when you feel like people don't want to understand it, that's the most hurtful thing to me. And it's not everybody, and it's not even most people. But even if, like, 2 people, you know, don't understand, and you don't think they want to understand, and it's like, man, if I was just at a church that was slowly declining, I'd have friends. You know, I'd have people on my side. I'd have people saying, hey, you know, because people can identify with me then. But nobody can, it's so lonely, and nobody can really identify with you. And so, and the people that come to my church don't get it, because they don't know what it's like to be, right? And so it's like part of you is, like, separate, but you want to be part of that. And people want you to be part of it, and you get criticized for, like, not being a part of things enough, or thinking you're better, which I don't think.
Right.
You know, and so it's just this misunderstanding.
You're being a lone ranger. You get that. Oh, okay. So the regular church isn't enough for Todd. Todd's got to go off and do his own thing.
And I'm sure, like, I've had a chip on my shoulder, and I've said stuff I shouldn't have said, and I've had an attitude, and I've, you know, some of that you protect yourself, right? You get an ego, you get arrogant to protect yourself, and you're, you know, and to guard yourself, because there's a lot of pain and a lot of loneliness involved in this. So I've done stuff to earn some of that, so I can own that, you know. But
I would say this, though. I think now is so much better than when I started, because when I started, I'm sure it existed, but I probably just didn't have the smarts to know how to do it. But we live in a time now when, if you're going to plan a church and you're going to do something different, and by different, I don't mean, no, we're going to we're going to have drums, guitars, and an organ. I'm talking different, like really out of the box kind of thinking that you got to know it's going to be lonely. Pastoring's a lonely thing anyway, because there's one of you and a whole congregation of other people. But then you move it to you trying to do this other thing that other people aren't doing. It's really lonely. The saving grace is that now with the internet, we can find the other misfit toys. Like you and I can find each other, and we can find Jasper at Belong, and we can find Ryan Kennedy at Free, and we can find all these people doing like really cool shit. Michael Ballman down in Dallas with the Union, with the coffee shop. Doing cool shit that I never would have found before. Like I just never would have found them. And now there's a sort of a kinship that you can have to go, hey, am I the only one? Did you guys run into this? It's like, oh my God, so much. You know what I mean? Nadia Bowles-Weber and I went to seminary together. We were friends in seminary, and she started house right around the time I started After Hours. And early on, it was a struggle, I mean, for both of us. And she was a godsend because she was Lutheran, I was United Methodist. But what a gift to be able to go out to breakfast and just commiserate and realize, we are square pegs and round holes. And it's not easy. And, Nadia is such a presence, such a power in a room. She damn near willed it to happen. I mean, she just did amazing stuff. But nonetheless, early on, it was a struggle. Even for some, now he's got 3 New York Times bestsellers, and it's still a struggle when she was starting off. And I think those are stories people need to hear, is that Nadia didn't just pop out and suddenly, was getting a story in the Atlantic. I mean, like, there was real time of, shit, I can't find anybody else to set up the chairs. I guess I'll do it. Like that shit, like the stuff that's really hard. And so for anybody that wants to do it, I think there's never been a time when it's been needed more than now. I mean, to reach people that normally aren't part of the church. In fact, I think God is applauding it more than ever to go, God, people need hope. God, people need some sort of understanding of compassion that maybe they didn't get and thought they couldn't. And now maybe they are getting it in a way, from going to, the things I'm doing, the things you're doing, and suddenly seeing God in a different light, even if it's a 15-minute thing we do on Sunday. We tell people, hey, and I'm very cognizant, that at any second, these people, they're not going to see, I don't know the 100 people that watch. I mean, at any second they can go, no, this is boring, click. I don't know when they get up to go get more coffee. So the fact that they tune in at all, one, is deeply humbling because there's no I don't know how to there's no requirement from them. I mean, with a lot of church folks, like, well, it's Sunday. They'll know if we're not there. We better go. Most people watching me know, they're like, fuck, he doesn't know if I'm showing up or not. They do is a huge feather. It makes you go, man, we're saying something that's reaching people, and there need to be more people doing that. It's just also being stone cold honest and going, there are going to be days that it just sucks. I mean, that you will really go. I mean, there's been a lot of days that I've been like, and I said to Laura, she's like, where's your head at with the podcast? And I go, I'm just so hoping I just don't go in and say, you know what, fuck it, burn it all down. Just burn it down. And she's like, I don't know if that's the right message. And I'm like, I know, but I look at someone like Tom Waits in the music industry, and it's like, this fucking guy took forever to not be in a genre and to go, how am I going to start this song? And I'm in a hotel room. If I slam that drawer, and I mean, you listen to like Mule Variations, and there's things on there that stuff. He literally recorded Bacon to make it sound like the scratches in vinyl. I mean, like, this guy, he's not outside the box. He blew the box up. You know, and I don't know. Last 5 years, he was in the Music Hall of Fame. So he took a long route for people to really recognize. But talk about a guy who's a purist that says, I don't need to fill arenas. And I'll tell you, man, you and I both know every clergy person looks at the numbers. I mean, we all look at the numbers. And to battle that ego and to battle that thing to say, look, man, I just need 2 people that go, holy shit, you changed something. I mean, that's a big damn deal to me. Really recognize I preached in the churches with 1,000 seats, and that's great. And I hope I affected people there too. But to not get wrapped into that, because this game can so easily pull you in to that sort of vibe, and for that to be the measurement. And for me, the measurement is, am I reaching people that weren't reached? That to me is 100 times more impactful for me than having big numbers. I just forget that sometimes, honestly.
It's quality over quantity, right?
Totally.
And it's still, you know, like I'm trying to figure out how to measure that. Like, because now, like right now, I just gave in and I just have to do things online. I think every church, not every church, but I mean, if we're going to move forward, I think we're going to have to figure out how to do things online. And so I started trying to keep track of numbers, and I've been, you know, starting to try to figure out, okay, what does this mean? Or like, how can we measure? How do we know what's successful? Because like, there's just no really good way. Like, you know, like I did a watch party. I do a watch party on Wednesdays for the videos that come out on Monday. And all these people will come. And like you said, people kind of want to be anonymous. I don't want to like call people out and be like, oh, hey, like so-and-so or whatever, and make them like, put them on the spot or make them talk or whatever. But like sometimes there'll be a whole watch party and I'll ask questions, nobody will answer them, and like I'll feel like a failure. But then like somebody will message me and be like, hey, I listened to that thing, and I never read the Bible. I mean, this happened like a few weeks ago. Like I had a 3-hour conversation with a friend of mine who was like, I never thought the Bible was like that. Like I never got that, you know, like the Bible came alive to me that night. And then she started sharing all these stories about how it related and to what we were talking about in the scripture and all the, she's like, there's a lot of truth in that, you know, that resonates with my experiences. And I had no idea. Like I always read the Bible like Shakespeare, you know, something. And this is like, there's some real shit here. Totally. And so like that conversation makes a huge difference in the life of one person. And man, I'd be in church for 3 years and I would not have one conversation like that, you know, in 3 years. And after a couple of weeks of doing this, you know, watch party thing and doing these things, so there's bearing some fruit, you know, but I can't measure those conversations because who's going to come out and like that's pretty rare for that to happen. And so I can't just count on that all the time either. So I need to find some way, you know, some way to keep it going and figure out that I'm using my time well.
Well, and it's so weird because, like I said, because there's not a congregation that's gathering face to face, people are coming and life happens. They've got to, so I'll do 1 week and, you know, 270 people watch. I'm like, yeah, the next week, like 90. And I'm like, what the fuck? What did I say that pissed you off? Or what? And it's like, you know, dude, not all about you. Maybe it was just a hectic week. Maybe shit. Or then you can go into analytics and you can look and go, wait a second. So 90% of the people who watched this came from Facebook, from the link I posted. And the next week it's 90% from LinkedIn. And you're like, okay, you know what? Maybe I've got to figure out a way to use the analytics to help figure out how do I reach more people and how do I reach the right people.
Yeah.
Not get so sucked into it that it becomes your dominating motivator. I mean, you know, a big piece of tonight's conversation about what is the motivation and what motivation. For me, when I get those texts, you know, I got a cousin that's recently started watching, and we never knew each other really. You know, I left Detroit pretty young, like in my early 20s, and never moved back. And so this was sort of a first connection for us. And then you see that she shares, your YouTube thing, and I'm like, hey, Kara, that's awesome that you shared that. And she goes, dude, you are doing exactly what you should be doing right where you should be doing it. And I don't want to say it, but I'm like, okay, so that will feed me for the next month. Like that, the 2 sentences that because like you said, they don't happen a lot. Like you don't get those all the time. And so when you do, it's just, to me, it's like God's little wink to go, hey, hang in there. It's okay. And it's going to be fine. But I mean, there's no question it's hard. I mean, there's no question. But you talk about the motivators. The motivators to me is, that there's people that, we did a sleeping bag drive. And for Aspen, the shit that I got, people are like, there's homeless people in Aspen? I'm like, look, man, I was in Denver. There's 5,700 homeless. There's 50 here in Aspen. Having said that, I still wouldn't want to be one of them. It's like, it doesn't matter how many numbers there are. It's like, there was a New York Times story that said most hypothermia sets in between 30 and 50 degrees. The average temperature in the winter here is 10. So I'm like, let's do a sleeping bag drive. I posted this shit on Saturday. On Monday, we had 58 sleeping bags at our front door from all over the country.
That's awesome.
That's some Jesus shit right there. That is not how good the sermon was, how great the music was, how great the fellowship was after. That's people going, you know what? I got $49 to help save somebody's life. That is where I think the future of the church will go, and where I think we may have drifted. I mean, I don't know if you keep track, but if you haven't, you need to sit down and do the math just to sit back in your chair and go, I'll be damned. The number of kids you fed, the number of homeless people you fed since you've started this ministry is mind-boggling. And on your darkest days, man, you need to open up that folder and look at that and sit there and go, there were some kids that were hungry, and we fed them. Which, by the way, for anybody who's a Bible geek, that's some straight up Matthew 25 shit. Like, man, when I was hungry, you fed me. It's like, I guess I did that. That matters, and I think that matters to God, and I'm more and more convinced that matters to the guy in the pickup truck, and that matters to the people that are at Don's, and that matters to Heather, and that matters to Cara. I mean, like, the more we drill down on that core, fuck, $50 is a lot of money. Like, I don't know anybody that can just throw around $50, and they're giving it to me to give to a stranger.
Yeah.
You got to be doing something right. I mean, the fact that they're willing to give you money to feed kids that they will never meet. They will never meet those kids. Mm-hmm. That to me puts me over the moon in regards to that.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. That's the way you have to hold on to. And that's and that comes back to the relationships that we build. And building the relationships is what helps us do that kind of ministry and those kind of ministries, because people know you, they know you're authentic, they know you, that you mean what you say, they don't have to listen to your sermons for them to know you. And that's because of the times that when you're hanging out, like watching the Lakers game or whatever, like, you're building those relationships with people, and they know that you're doing good things. They might never come to your church, but if that's the only thing you're measuring, then you're not seeing, like, if that's all you did, like, if all you did was worry about the people that are coming to your church, you wouldn't have gotten 58 sleeping bags,
Right.
But you've built relationships with people all over the country and you mean what you say, and you do what you mean, and you do what you say. Yeah. And there's authenticity about you, and people know that, and they know you, and because you've been vulnerable with them, and you've been, all the things that we're kind of taught not to do, when I was,
right.
learning to be a pastor, like, it's like, don't get too close to people, like, don't let people into your personal life, like, keep good boundaries, like, all those things. And some of that's important, but man, some of it, like, that's part of what's getting us in trouble, is that we don't have good relationships.
Yeah.
And we don't learn how to make good friends. We don't learn how to make new friends very well. because we hold on to this idea, the title of being a pastor sometimes,
Right.
and people just don't care anymore about that.
They really don't.
And the people that do are already going to church.
Right. That's right. And I got to keep coming back to this. It's like I want to be so clear that this is not a slam against people who go to church. I find myself going, God bless you that you found a community that does that. All we're trying to do is make the circle wider. Like, we just want to bring more people into having a community, having a place to go and to be with, have a place where you can say, you know what, this week sucked. And I'm broken, and, Friday night I got hammered, and it was a train wreck, and I just need you guys around. To give them that is the greatest gift we can give them, is to be able to say, look, there is a God that loves you, and these people around you, they are going to manifest that. Like, that's how God's going to function in the world, is through that sort of, fancy church word incarnation. It's like, look, man, I've watched strippers be Christ to truckers. I've watched that happen. And so for me, when I see them at after hours and I just see them walk over and put their arms around somebody who's sobbing, I'm like, this is the kingdom of God. Yeah. Like, that's what I see here. And a huge piece of it is to be able to rip off that mask. I just did a sermon, where Jesus talks about hypocrites, and, that's a Greek word for an actor who said his lines behind a mask. And it's like, everybody wears masks. I mean, everybody's got that to a degree. It's like, how do we keep shedding that more and more and more to the place where, people see our authentic self? Because I think the closer we get to that, the closer they get to seeing God. That God spark in us is our essential self. I mean, Thomas Merton would say that. Richard Rohr would say that. Right. People a lot smarter than me would say that's your true self. And I think when I think, how do we go into these communities that don't have the language to be authentically who they are, I think that's the gift that we can bring. And I pray to God there are people watching this that are trying to find the guts to do it. My message is, do it. I mean, because I think God, I wish I could remember who said, the universe favors the bold, or it's something like that. I wish I remember the quote.
Fortune favors the bold.
Fortune favors the bold. And I'm like, get out there and try. And you know what? My failures to success are nowhere. It's 1,000 times more failures than I've had success. Yeah. You just can't let that be the reason not to try, because, God, there's going to be people watching this, or other people that should be doing some shit that you and I simply can't do. I mean, for whatever reason, it is not your bag, it's not mine, but it's theirs. Yeah. And I really think that God goes, if you don't do this, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, I need you to do this. And, that would be my hope through this podcast or any others, is that it gives somebody enough oomph to jump out and give it a shot. That'd be cool.
Well, and you get good at starting things. You get good at being innovative. Like, you start working those muscles out, because things are changing so fast, man. And who knows if bars are going to be ever back to the way they were? Who knows if bars are going to, we had church in bars. You had church in bars. Maybe bars might not be like the thing people do anymore. Like, who knows how long this will last? Who knows? Like, right now, dude, it's like a ghost town in here. Like, I'm not gonna meet people here, and I have to sit far away. Everyone's far away from each other, and there's no, this is a terrible place to have church now. So I have to. But the better I get at starting things, or being innovative, or looking at, okay, now where are people going to hang out? Now maybe it's house churches. People go over to each other's houses. Like, my band plays a house party. And so maybe that's the thing, and maybe house churches are the thing. But now I've already started something in bars, so now I know how to start something in houses, right? You do the same thing, you just do it in a different place.
The better you get at being innovative, then when you do get dinged and somebody tags you and you're on the ground, you're like, wow, am I bleeding? Holy shit, it hurt. But you're not as thrown by. I mean, I was in karate all through junior high, high school, and college. And when people ask me about it, I'm like, you know what I learned? I learned how to get hit. Like I say that half jokingly, but I also learned that I'm not bothered by getting punched now. Whereas I think most people, it freaks them out. Just psychologically, it's like, hell, I've been hit 1,000 times. And I think that's when you're an entrepreneur and you keep trying new things. It's like, roadblocks are just roadblocks. And you crawl over it or around it or under it or you move it or whatever. But you're almost, you expect it and you're used to it. You're like, all right, how many times have we talked about, oh, this is great. And then you're like, yeah, and then this happened. We're like, son of a bitch. Okay. And then, but you know what? You got up off the mat and you went around it and you figured out a new way. My God, we've heard each other talk about, we've gone around 1,000 things. I mean, in all the years we've known each other, it's like, that to me is the muscle that you're talking about, that you develop. It's like, you just learn, all right, this is part of the gig. This is just part of the job. You know what I mean? Stop whining. It's just part of it. And I'm like, right about the time I get whiny, I'm like, shut up. Nobody had a gun to your head. You chose to do this. And the highs are so awesome that we're willing to. So, quick story about Hollywood that has almost nothing to do except for this. As I said this line, it reminded me. So Shane Black was a screenwriter, and he wrote the first Lethal Weapon movie. He was the first screenwriter to get paid $1 million, first one ever. And then he wrote some other things, and I can't remember the one that he wrote that was just a piece of shit and was a huge dumpster fire. And he got cold, and he didn't work anymore. And then he was being interviewed, and he started to come back, and he had some successes. And in this interview, I don't know where he was in his trajectory, but they said, tell us about trying to claw your way back. And he goes, here's the thing. When you make it to that top 10% and then lose it, and you know how good the top 10% was, you are willing to eat all the shit to get back to the top 10%. And let's face it, I mean, there's some great moments in church planting, but the reality is there's a lot of really shitty moments. And when you have that conversation with that guy or that woman that goes, I never looked at the Bible that way before. Or I never even read the Bible. Or you know what? That was the first sermon I've heard in 25 years. Those moments are so good, you will eat all the rest of the shit to get back to another one of those. Because you're this is why I started this. This is why I got into doing this. This is what matters to me. And I'll deal with all the other crap just to know that I'm having that effect every 100th person or whatever the number is. That matters. And ever since he said that, I was like, wow, I'm willing to eat a lot to get to there, to get to those moments. And I don't even think I think those people say those moments sort of offhandedly. I don't think they know what they mean to you or what they mean to me or what they mean to the other pastor when we hear it, because, pastors get a lot of crap. I mean, and a lot of side conversations and things that aren't great. And so when somebody does do that, I mean, it keeps you alive. It keeps you going, which is pretty damn cool. I mean, thank God for those people.
Absolutely. And so it makes me think of, there's that saying that you get knocked down 7 times and you get up 8, right? Like that's the whole thing, is that you keep getting back up. And I think that my kind of final thought here is trying to kind of take some ownership of this in the sense of that, people tell me things, but if other pastors would tell me, if they would try to realize how hard this is, and other pastors would be like, man, like just think of what that would mean. You know, and what a big deal that would be. And so maybe what I need to do, like when I was young, and I would not get, someone would piss me off, I would invite them to lunch. And so not everyone I invited to lunch did I not like. So in case anybody's listening to this,
somebody right now, well, that son of a bitch invited me. Exactly, I didn't know he was pissed. Yeah.
But I just would invite him, instead of talking shit about him, or if I found myself talking shit about him, I would be like, okay, I invite him to lunch and I get to know him. And some of those people are some of like they're my friends now, totally. You know, because we got to know each other. And I tried to, instead of thinking bad about him. So I think that something that I can do, and something that I can kind of learn from this is, number one, that I can maybe see how hard it is for regular traditional church people to do their job, and maybe give them a word of encouragement and let them know how much I appreciate what they're doing, instead of just expecting them to do that, you know, for me. Because I get caught up in my own shit, but so do they.
Absolutely.
So maybe I can start that momentum, and then also help encourage people to just start stuff. You know, like this is hard, and you have to get good at it, but you got to just do it. You got to just do it the first time, and you got to do it the second time and the third time in order to be able to do anything successful. And we're not on the cover of, you know, Christian Monthly or whatever. Like,
you don't even know the name of the magazine.
I don't.
You're like, we're not on the cover of Jesus Weekly or whatever. I don't know what the magazine. I don't read those magazines.
Maybe you've been on it, but I've never been on it. So I'm not at the pinnacle of success at the mountaintop either. But it's going to take a lot more failures probably before I'm the Pope or the Methodist Pope or whatever things are going to turn into.
I think you hit it on the head, in that at its core, as you whittle this down over and over and over and keep distilling it, we get to, and if I was a better Christian, a better Bible reader, I'd know which letter this was. But when Paul, let's say Philippians, look it up later, see if I'm right. I don't know. But when Paul says encourage one another, I mean, that's it at the core, is that, you know what, I can do a better job encouraging my colleagues that are doing traditional church. And quite frankly, not just my colleagues. It's like, there is nothing that is easier to do than give somebody a good word. And I mean the Bible-y way. I mean, like, just going, you know what, I know you're getting your ass kicked right now, and I just want to know that I've noticed, and I think you're amazing. I mean, the way you're standing up to all this, and, you know, life has been less than great, and you're a rock star in my book. That took me no time to say, cost me not a cent, cost me nothing but 9 seconds it took me to say, why don't we do that more? And my God, if we don't live in a time where we all need to hear that more, rather than bullshit attacks that just happen nonstop. It's like, you know, if I had a final word, it's like, if somebody wants to try something new, encourage them. And you know what? If they're not trying something new, encourage them. And if it's a mom trying to feed 2 kids with 2 jobs, fucking encourage them, man.
Exactly.
You don't know, that may be the best thing that happened to them all week. And I think that you talk about a motivator. I've had those people in my life. I've had those people say those things, and that gives me fuel for weeks, months. I mean, it is unbelievable, the power of an encouraging word. I mean, I can't say enough about it, and I think why we don't do it is sort of mind-boggling. But I guarantee that that's part of God's plan. I guarantee God applauds that. I guarantee God rejoices in the idea of us encouraging each other. And so, you know, if I had a parting word, that would be it. Would be encouraging. That's good. You know, and I'm fine with ripping it off from Paul. He's dead.
For quite some time.
right, for sure.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jerry. Man, this was good. This was encouraging to me. And thank you all for listening. And maybe we'll have a guest on. We can talk about having a guest on next week that's doing something new to help encourage us and give us some ideas and sparks our imagination. Because, man, this is the time we got to do something new. We got to do new stuff. Like, and we got to just create space for people to do new things in as many ways as possible.
For sure. That's awesome.
So, Thank you all. Thank you so much, Jerry.
Thanks, Todd. This is awesome. I dig it.
Absolutely. We'll see y'all next month.
See you next time. Yep.